The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. In front of him there was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus spoke to the scholars of the law and Pharisees in reply, asking, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath or not?" But they kept silent. So he took the man, and after he healed him, dismissed him. Then he said to them, "Who among you, if your son or ox falls into a cistern, would not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" But they were unable to answer his question. The Gospel of the Lord. St. Paul was a very good Jew. He knew his Bible well. So in that first reading, when he speaks about children of Israel, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises, the patriarchs. And he's speaking about what we call the Torah. The first 5 books for us as Christians, the Old Testament. The first 5 books is absolutely critical to know these 5 books. He's speaking about, of course, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These are the foundation stones of the Jewish people. These were the books written by Moses himself, who, of course, as we know, contacted the living God. And in these 5 foundational texts, there's foundation stones for them. And so now here comes Jesus, and how radical Jesus was, and how perplexing and how scandalous he was when he says, and he's here, when he says, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" Again, reverting back to the law. Because it's the very words of God himself. And because remember, on the Sabbath day for the Jewish people, you don't do anything on that day. That day is squarely focused on God and worship. So now Jesus is entering in and he says, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" And when he does that, when he cures on the Sabbath, what Jesus just did here, and by implication, everybody knew what that meant. Jesus is saying, I am above the Torah. I am above Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. Who else could be above the very laws given to them by God? Well, God himself. Do you see how radical this is for them? Because remember, here Jesus sitting literally in front of them. And Jesus is telling them, essentially in this, when he cures the person here with dropsy, I am greater than the law. Go back again to the Sunday readings when they asked Jesus, what is the greatest law? And he says, quoting Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 7. Love God, again, remember, returning back to that theme. Love God, we're called as Christians to love God with all of our hearts, souls, and minds. And then love our neighbor as ourselves. The great saint we remember today, Saint Martin de Porres, a Peruvian saint from Lima, in the 17th century would live this out. Because to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, what does that mean? It sounds so grandiose, doesn't it? So difficult that we don't even begin. It sounds like a big mountain. It's almost like trying to climb Mount Everest. Where do you even begin? St. Martin shows us how. Do small, random, mundane tasks with great love. He would spend hours in front of the Holy Eucharist, and he would contemplate God with all of his heart, his soul, and his mind. And then from there, he would flow out, and then he would sweep the floor of the church with reverence. Then he would encounter every single person, even the most poorest. As we know, poor people are sometimes hard to deal with. And he would love them because it all flowed from loving God and the Holy Eucharist. After Mass today, being First Friday, we will have an opportunity to kneel before the Lord in the Holy Eucharist. That is one of the most fervent ways to increase our spiritual life. To kneel in quiet contemplation before the Lord. As St. Alphonsus Liguori reminded us, the saints became saints precisely through contemplation, meditating upon the Lord and the profound love shown through Christ who comes now in the flesh. For as remember Jesus said, and I'll end here, there is something greater here. And he was pointing to himself. The Torah walking among us.